Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So yes, with my presentation we'll slightly move on from literature to visual arts, and I'm going to describe the notion of both non-simultaneity and simultaneity in European constructivism. So the notion of non-simultaneity was for the first time was developed by Ernst Bloch in the 1930s, for the first time used a little bit earlier. And it can be seen as one of the main characteristics of modernism, as a coexistence of realities from radically different moments of history. Non-simultaneity, this notion might be seen as a tool allowing us to gain a different perspective on the history and historiography of the European constructivist avant-garde, correcting the common assumptions and conventional views on the historical status of constructivism, as well as it can be a basic element in the self-understanding within this group. My aim today is to explore this concept, focusing on mutual relations and patterns between East and West, exemplified by a look at the contacts between Polish, Dutch and Flemish constructivism, as well as the similarities and the differences in the programmatic and artistic practices. Using Bloch's theory, I will revise the notion of non-simultaneity in the assumed uneven development of constructivism in the Eastern and Central Europe compared to the West, the attributed role of the avant-garde in the eyes of its contemporaries, and the concept of simultaneity described by the avant-gardists themselves in the writings. Of course, due to the time limits, I'm just gonna go through certain examples, and I will use the Bloch's theory just as a starting point. I'm not going to go into the merits. Wilhelm Pinder, in his book The Problem of Generation in European Art History in 1926, has for the very first time used the term the non-simultaneity of the simultaneous. And 6 years later, Bloch used it in his essay discussing the issue of heterogeneous stages of social and economic development coexisting simultaneously in Germany in the 1930s. Pinder actually began Bloch began his article with a very nice statement: "Not all people live in the same now." I think we should remember it while I go through the first point, the historiography. It is commonly assumed in the historiography of constructivist movement that the East was running behind the West, even though Central and Eastern European artists frequently belong to the forefront of the avant-garde, for example in Bauhaus on Paris. The assumed non-simultaneity is here a product of the Western historiographical perspective, which obscured in the post-1945 East-West division of Europe, because the fall of Berlin confronted the Western Europe with the realities of non-simultaneity in the former communist countries. Hence, the Eastern and Central European art stayed for a long time on the sidelines of the canon of art history. It was also excluded from international accounts while the history of modern art was being mapped. Only gradually have these regions gained more attention among art historians, for example with an exhibition held in Bonn in 1994 called Europa, and which focused on the other Europe, previously unknown to the West. Notwithstanding the historiography of European constructivism, this network was actually marked by a remarkable simultaneity in its supranational interactions, exchange and collaboration. The viewpoints, works and ideas of the artists were constantly exchanged and circulated between various nodes of the constructivist network and between its journals. The journals were established by particular groups, creating a worldwide network of periodicals, and they regularly referred to each other, reprinted texts from congenial editions in various languages. The fact that the journals created a supranational network can be seen on various examples. For example, they cross-referred to each other, naming other titles. They also emphasized their multinational outreach, as we can see here on the cover of Bloch from 1925 and from the Stele from 1927, both journals here have actually incorporated the, let's say, the proof of how international they were inside. The texts and reproductions were reprinted in various editions of various magazines within the network. For instance, the Polish Blok and Presence presented articles and works of Dutch Theo van Desburg, Werkman or Oud. And as the Polish journals wrote on Western art and culture, also the Flemish and the Dutch ones discussed the Polish scenes in their magazines. Theo van Desburg, for example, wrote on Polish architecture in various issues of Het Bouwbedrijf between 1926 and 1931, and Blok discussed modern Dutch architecture. Also, texts of Polish artists were published abroad, as for example you can see on your right, Brzękowski's article called The Nieuwe Kunst in Polen from Het Overzicht from 1923. Of course, the artists also wrote to each other. Here you can see an example of a letter sent to Van Tongerlo from a Polish group Presence, but we also have tracks of both Dutch and Polish architects out in circles writing to each other, or painters such as Starzewski or van Desburg. Now the second notion, which would be the historical status of the avant-garde. We should bear in mind that the internal simultaneity within the group coincided with very profound external non-simultaneities. And the constructivist aesthetics had a very untimely relation to the mainstream cultural conventions. And constructivist nuclei were consciously non-simultaneous agencies in the respective local cultural settings. Movements such as the Style and Blok functioned aside the main artistic currents, and I think we should kind of bear in mind that every time we speak about the avant-garde movements in visual art, they had marginal character without any substantial recognition then in local literature, literary and artistic field. Blok's notion of non-simultaneity may be helpful here to explain this dimension, as he sees an artist as something different from what circulates among people, what unites people, and more mere contemporaneity. Also, Pinder pointed to the non-simultaneous character of contemporary art and artists with their own now, and inner aim reflecting their unique way of experiencing life, which in consequence led to the artist being mysterious and indescribable, living only, so to speak, before their very own defined and narrow audience. Quoting Enzensberger, the precursors and strugglers are, at the very moment of the process, simultaneously present. The en avant of the avant-garde would, as it were, realize the future and the present, and to anticipate the course of history. It was also the case of Constructivism, which we appreciate today, but when it appeared, it was not really appreciated. As we can see the example here, in 1925, the group The Style was not allowed to participate in the Dutch section of l'Exposition des Arts Décoratifs, and the reaction was published in the same year in The Style, called Appel de Protestation, which was signed by various artists, including Polish artists, for example. Also, in the Polish bloc, we could see some reactions to the position of Constructivism. In the second issue from 1924, there is a note commenting a very unenthusiastic article from a newspaper called Tygodnik Ilustrowany, which argued that the author, due to his inadequate background, had completely misunderstood Blok's viewpoints and reduced their meaning. The artists of Blok's answered, "What we do is not imitating, but trying to keep up with the latest trends in France, Germany, Russia, etc." The non-simultaneous character of Constructivism was also reflected in the polemic between contemporary art critics. In an article in Presence from 1926, an art critic, Stefania Zachorska, published her essay, A Critique Against Modernism, saying that among critics there are very few creative and modern people. She also criticized those who, driven by the most primitive self-preservation instincts, try to negate what they cannot comprehend. Moving on to the third aspect, I would like here to present the notion of simultaneity as a concept used by various artists in their writings or currents. Many avant-garde movements have used this notion. For example, simultanéisme by Sonia and Robert Delaunay, or poème simultané in Tristan Tzar's works, or simultanéité in Cornelis van Eesteren. The role of this notion can be seen in the second issue of Presence, where various articles discussed the issue of simultaneity in many aspects. For example, architecture, theater, photography, and film. You can see these articles here. According to Circus, from this number quoting, the simultaneity can be seen as a synchronism of various phenomena marking his era. And once people have encountered the simultaneity somewhere in the heart of a big city, it is impossible for them to think otherwise and not to search for it everywhere they go. He saw an architect as a mettre en scène of simultaneity, not allowing it to become chaotic and giving it its functional and aesthetic value. Van Eesteren, a Dutch architect, claimed that architecture becomes a functionalized simultaneous space, and the architect sees and comprehends the architectural space as a unity of simultaneous tensions. He underlined the necessity of cohesion between form and function, as only when all technical restraints be put aside, functions can be ordered and put as one simultaneity in one creative concept with proper, clear and understandable form. In both The Stale and Presence, Van Eesteren presented his project of a commercial center in The Hague under the motto of simultaneity. It was his first architectural example of the implementation of this notion in architecture. The most interesting here is his description of the project. According to him, the architectural form is the materialization of living thoughts which must recognize real functions and encompass them with the minimum of means. Hence, functions, construction, and the living contents of the task create one simultaneity. His building is actually maybe perceived simultaneously, let's say the interior from the outside and the exterior from the inside. And also an interesting detail here, that the project itself was presented as a simultaneous depiction of a plan, a section and an axonometric projection, which might be a very nice metaphor of this new spatial concept. Now I'd like to go on to the conclusions. So first of all, I must underline that the Constructivism was in a double way non-simultaneous, both in its simultaneity and non-simultaneity. Yet different from the historiographical assumption of an East-West temporal incommensurability, it was actually in Central and Eastern Europe where rapid modernization processes took place, which make this assumption quite inadequate. On the other hand, the internal simultaneity of the constructivist network coincided with a very profound external non-simultaneities, as they functioned aside the mainstream cultural conventions and had a marginal character, incomparable to the current perception of the movements. Last but not least, the concept of simultaneity played an important role in the modernist movement themselves, with various artists expressing it in many different forms. Revising the notion of the assumed non-simultaneity, I'd come to the conclusion that the other Europe, just like the West, proved to be the domain of modernization, but given the specifics of the region and the particular character of the it created a particular character of the modernity, which, however, stayed in a constant dialogue with the Western nodes. Yes. The original reforms were born in Eastern Europe, which can be actually justified by two laws. The law of the celebrating Head Start from 1937 and the law of the stimulative errors from 1980, which claim that an initial head start in a given area, that means in a well-developed centers, might become a hindrance to further development. Conversely, backward groups might soon overcome the primal leaders and become new ones, new centers. Therefore, the peripheries, the so-called peripheries, in my opinion, should be regarded as a unique phenomenon where influences from various centers met and mixed, creating new value and unique pieces of art. It was here where experiments and original works, and as well as unprecedented modernist projects, were born, in contrary to various common views and assumptions. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you.